Welcome to the Boom Trust podcast, where we explore important topics on neurodevelopmental disorders, which include but are not limited to Autism Spectrum Disorder, cerebral palsy, dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, among others. Beauty out of Mire. Our aim is to enable individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders to live to their maximum potential and live fulfilling lives like every other person. I am your host, Dr. Fidel Baraza. Today we feature Alice Mundia, who is the chairperson of Differently Talented Societies of Kenya, and she's also an advocate for inclusive policies in Africa. And we want to look at how policies affect the landscape of those affected with NDDs in Africa. Alice, once again, I'll give you an opportunity to tell the people who you are and what this topic means to you as an individual.
So thank you very much, Dr. Fidel. My name is Alice Mundia, the chairperson of Differently Talented Society of Kenya, a group that brings together autistic persons and their caregivers. And this is a group that began in 2015, and we have continued, of course, to soar high in terms of, as an organization, and in terms of being able to engage and even influence policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm very keen to know how policies actually play a very crucial role in providing access to education, healthcare, employment, and even just the general social inclusion for persons with neurodevelopmental disorders. Now, remember, when we talk about neurodevelopmental disorders, we are talking about conditions that affect the developing brain and the central nervous system, and these include but are not limited to Autism Spectrum Disorder, cerebral palsy, intellectual disability, dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, among others. And so we have our children, they are there. Yourself, you're a mother of a young person, 20 years old, with autism spectrum, spectrum disorder. Myself, I have a daughter, she is a teenager, 14 years old. She is on the autism spectrum, but also has cerebral palsy. And we are representatives of many other families that have persons with neurodevelopmental disorders as part of their ecosystem. And so we find many parents, and especially here in Africa, we are there, we lack information about all these things. And so today we want to look at these policies. When we think about policies, how do they, play that crucial role in these spaces that are very key on our children? And as you do that, maybe just to help us understand how policies influence also the opportunities available to individuals with NDDs in Africa as a whole, in Kenya at home. But again, we talk about Africa because it looks like our conditions and situations and struggles seem to be almost similar in a way in Africa.
So thank you very much, Dr. Fidel. Inclusive policies is the backbone of service provision. And policies tend to really influence everything that happens around you in terms of access to care, access to services, access to rehabilitation, access to provision of assistive technology, access to education, access to healthcare. So we cannot be able to move an inch without policy. Because if something is not anchored in policy, then it becomes very difficult to access it. And so we find that policy act it's like the guiding framework that is going to guide provision of healthcare, is the guiding framework to on provision of inclusive education. So the policy framework is very, very key when we discuss matters of neurodevelopmental disabilities. And these policy frameworks begin, of course, at the global level with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UNCLPD. And then they are localized, of course, at Africa level, we have the African Protocol. We say the African Protocol with the big name. it's of course the guiding document, all the guiding convention or policy that is going to guide in terms of how persons with disabilities will access services, how they will access education, how they will access healthcare. At national level, of course, we have the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and the Persons with Disabilities Act 2010. These are all the law, the legal framework, the legislative framework, the national policy that was currently under, national policy for persons with disabilities that was currently under, it was recently under public participation. And we have a lot of other laws where persons with disabilities have, of course, in terms of their access to services, has been mentioned. So the legal framework, the guiding policies, of course, the guidelines that are existing are very key, because it's through that we can be able to access certain services. And the government, of course, has the mandate in terms of development of the policy framework. At national level, we know that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is anchored in Article 2.6 of our Constitution, where it indicates that all global conventions that the country has signed or ratified form part of the Kenyan law. And the document is like the guiding book when it comes to persons with disabilities, articles that are very clear on how certain services are supposed to be provided, whether it's issues around Article 24 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that speaks to matters of education and inclusive education, and ensuring that persons with disabilities can pursue education that is lifelong and that is within the areas of interest, and that they get the support and accommodations that they require. All matters relating to healthcare and matters relating to habilitation and rehabilitation, matters relating to their participation in sports, Article 30, matters relating to non-discrimination and equality of opportunities, Article 5 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So we find that all this being anchored in the legislative and legal framework that is existing means that persons with disabilities can be able to use that document to be able to ask questions, or when they are participating during public participation forums, they can cite it as a guiding document or as a guiding law. You know, it's not just a guiding document, but also a guiding legal framework that they can cite in terms of how services are supposed to be provided. So without that, and I know one of the key gaps we had, like earlier on, I remember when we kept pushing the push and pull for recognition of autism and other neurodevelopmental disabilities, even within registration of persons with disabilities. You know, that journey when autism was considered as other, and you would just have to write. And what we realize is today, when it comes to like assessment of persons with disabilities, there's a guiding document, there's the guidelines that have been provided by Ministry of Health that are supposed to guide how registration is supposed to happen, how not registration is supposed to happen, but how medical assessment is supposed to happen. And that then moves down to National Council for Persons with Disabilities, the tools that have been developed that actually can be used within the healthcare system when it comes to medical assessment, and for a person to move from the pathway of being assessed within the health center or the healthcare system. Assessment, of course, happens within the sub-district or sub-county hospitals, but how they move from just being assessed, the medical assessment that is happening, to move towards registration with National Council for Persons with Disabilities, that is anchored in policy. Recently, we saw National Council for Persons with Disabilities also release the Autism and Related Developmental Disabilities monograph. They carried out a research study, and they've been able to identify what are caregivers saying, what are autistic persons says, what are persons with neurodevelopmental disabilities saying in terms of their service provision and their support needs, what it is that they require. So the guiding policy framework is very, very key, because this is something that can be cited, this is something that can be used to program, to budget, to plan, you know, and without that being there, then it means that you will be left on your own. So
very true.
Of course, like the gaps that are existing currently in policy, where the Persons with Disability Act has not been enacted. We have the Persons with Disability Act 2003, but then it's not in line with the Constitution of Kenya 2010, and it's not in line with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because the convention was ratified in 2008. The Constitution of Kenya is Constitution of Kenya 2010, and the Persons with Disability Act is Persons with Disability Act 2003. So, of course, you know, that local policy framework, that local law that people will recognize keenly will be the Persons with Disability Act as a guiding policy when someone wants to make reference on provision of certain services. Then, of course, we would want to see, of course, the Persons with Disability Act being in line with the Constitution and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. You know, these guiding policies also create opportunities, employment of persons with disabilities. You see, it's anchored in Article 54 of the Constitution, but the Constitution Article 54 of the Constitution is very clear that 5% of the opportunities should go when it comes to
in every organization needs to be
employment, whether it's in appointed positions or elective positions, at least 5% goes to persons with disabilities.
But then you find that is not really what we find and experience on the ground. That is just my problem is that we have that cast on paper somewhere, but then when it comes to implementation down, you know, on the ground, you will find that organizations, employers are very hesitant to take on board persons with disabilities. And I'm wondering, how can we be able to get the policies to beyond being on paper, being written, theoretical, to pragmatic, so that then it's implemented on the ground?
It means that on the ground we need to influence policy. We know that Article 54 did put across that says progressively, you know, progressive realization, you know, progressive realization of that right. So meaning that it was not going to happen instantly that 5% of persons with disabilities were going to get into gainful employment, but the Constitution said progressively. And that is why we talk about the Persons with Disability Act, because it needs to really anchor and operationalize Article 54 of the Constitution. So that it can then move down and trickle down to actual service provision. You know, that has been a key area, and that has been a grey area in terms of implementation of policy, and our participation in public participation forums is also very key.
And maybe as even you talk about that before you move away from that. Before you move away from that, it's good to also speak about how then these policies can also impact the access to spiritual formation. I'm thinking about worship congregations where persons and individuals with neurodevelopmental disabilities at times are left out on the holistic formation that will include their spiritual formation, education, access to education as individuals, access to, you know, even when it comes to travels. Think about, we think about the, you know, the traveling and all that, how do we call them? You know, like the sector, tourism sector, industry. You know, and even just traveling, you want to go and board a plane, and then you are supposed to be able to self-declare the conditions that you have. And when you go to the declaration part, you look at the provisions that are there, you don't see your category and you don't know where to categorize yourself, because even what has been there, it's not quite it, and leads further to stigmatization or something. And so you are left oscillating on whether should I declare, I should not declare, because of even just the wordings and all that. But we need to come to a place where policies are all round and we are all able to easily feel accommodated and access what's there. So will you please speak to that also?
Thank you very much. When we talk broadly about the policy framework, there's a lot of policy framework, even within the Ministry of Education, the sector policy for learners and trainees with disabilities, you know, the curriculum that has been developed. Of course, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to specific service provision. But then, holistically, when you think about it in terms of implementation of some of these policies, of course there are gaps. There are quite a lot of gaps, and so many things have come and been discussed even globally, and best practices that are happening across the continents, you know, happening in the global north that needs to be replicated in the global south, in terms of how they are operationalizing the existing policy frameworks that they have. But what we are finding is we need a lot of advocacy, and that is why as organizations of persons with disabilities, we cannot slow down in terms of our voices, you know, because sometimes when it comes to people in the ground understanding policy, let's say even within the religious churches, how do our pastors and priests understand, or our reverends, or whoever it is, the clergy, understand the policy framework and how it's supposed to guide in terms of provision of religious, of course, provision of services within the religious spaces. How does it trickle down? Of course, the convention is there, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but how do we operationalize it so that we can realize it on the ground? It tells us that quite a lot of advocacy needs to happen, and more so, institutions and individuals sitting in certain spaces need to make the step forward towards inclusion, because everyone is saying that we are inclusive, but then when you come to the same spaces, are the spaces accessible? Are there lamps that persons on wheelchair can be able to access the services? What happens in service meetings? You know, what is happening in service? Is the service accommodative to persons with diverse disabilities? Is it accommodative to children with neurodiverse disabilities? Are we finding our children with neurodiverse disabilities in the religious spaces? And if they are not there, because they have a right like everybody else to be there, because they need to also access that service like everybody else. They need also to have a linkage at an early age and get it to Sunday school with their peers and learn alongside them, you know, until they get to adulthood. But then, of course, we need also to frame our spaces to ensure that we are accommodative to this group of learners who want to see things visually, want to read, to see pictures, pictorial formats, language being provided, the language that is being used when we are training, is it easy to read and to understand? Are the materials being provided for them to learn at an early age, whether it's in the religious sector or it's in the inclusive education space? Is the materials accommodative? Is it provided in modes that persons with neurodevelopmental disabilities can be able to understand, to read, to be able to follow, you know? And how are we designing it? So it means that we need to purposefully just go into the best practices that are happening globally. You know, there's a lot of online materials that is easy to read, even how to design easy to read format material. You know, you can just go, right now we have ChatGPT, we have a lot of computer AI enabled, programs that you can use, you know, to ensure that these learners are being accommodated. Because remember, if these children are being denied that light at an early age, then it means that at every stage of life they are going to move alongside their peers. And then where are they going to transition into? They will not have a country or space that is very specific to them, you know. They need to be integrated well within the society. They need to play alongside their peers. They need to be able to participate in church and church activities. So we need to make those purposeful decisions to include, you know, and look at what is happening globally. What are the best practices? What are the resources that are available? How do we custom them to accommodate diverse learners or learners with diverse needs? So it means that for the law and the policies to be actioned, it means somebody somewhere has to make certain decisions to operationalize them. Otherwise, when they are in the shelves, they may not necessarily benefit anyone for that matter. And remember that inclusion does not just support that child with neurodiverse disability, but it supports all children. Because all children would benefit with easy to read material. All children will benefit with material that is pictorial. All children will benefit with safe spaces safe, accessible spaces, you know, green spaces. You know.
And you see God in his own creativity and wisdom, he's made the world to be all-inclusive.
Yes.
I say he's created some people to be tall, some to be short, some to be light, some to be darker, some to be plump, some, and that is what makes the world a beautiful place. Imagine if we were all the same height, same color, same personality, same everything. It will make the world a very boring place. And so the diversity is what makes it more enjoyable, more appealing, such a good place for us to be. And we all belong to something beautiful with our diversity, and therefore we need to have these policies that are accommodating, inclusive in every sector, in every organization, in every society, so that we know that every person belongs, and every person is coming with something unique to contribute to the betterment and to the flourishing of the society.
Wow. Inclusivity begins with us, you know. It begins with you as an individual. Your home, your space, you know. How is it inclusive and accommodative to people? How is it inclusive? Even the way, and remember that many of our children face a lot of stigma within the society. They are shunned. They are told, you know, a young child, you're telling a 4-year-old, get out of my house. What is the language? And
at times, even it begins with in our own homes, spaces.
In the community where you are, in the society where. So we need to be purposeful. The law, as it is on a shelf, if it is not operationalized to the ground, may not really bring the fruits that are meant to be. You know? But we need to action it, and we action it within the spaces where we are. You know, if you are in the workplace and you realize that there are gaps in the workplace, you raise it. How can we make the workplace accommodative? How can we ensure that we hire persons with disabilities? And we also ensure that the underrepresented groups of persons with neurodiverse disabilities, with neurodevelopmental disabilities, are also not being left behind in the workplace. Because remember that sometimes persons with autism may end up not getting into that game for employment because they have an invisible disability, you know. So sometimes people think that persons with disabilities that can be seen, as long as you have a few you've employed, you are inclusive. But then think about persons with disabilities in their diversity across domains, you know, and ensure that you're not leaving some people behind. Just because somebody has come in, has exited the school system without certificates, does not necessarily mean that they have nothing to offer. You know, if it's within their area of interest, they can learn. Just give them an opportunity. And we have differentiated kind of learning, and even in the education spaces, we can be able to focus on the talents and the giftings. Some of them are very good and great swimmers. Some of them are very good in photography. Some of them are very good in the kitchen. Some of them are very good in sports, in technical devices. So we just need to tap into their area of gifting and talent, and then be able to a strength-based approach.
Strength-based approach, The
areas of interest and talent, you know. What is this that they like? What is this that they can be able to do? And assume competence at all times, you know. Don't assume that just because somebody has a certain disability, they cannot do. You will be surprised. Assume competency at all times.
Just because somebody has a speech disorder doesn't mean that they are not intelligent enough to be able to work. Because those are some of the things that we assume misperceptions about disability, because some of them may have a sensory disorder or a speech disorder, and they're quiet. It doesn't mean that because they're quiet, they don't hear. They will hear, they will understand, they'll be able to execute their work.
And globally, we've seen autistic persons working in Microsoft, in JP Morgan, which is a bank.
They're great scientists, by the way.
Working with a lot of international organizations.
Some of the great scientists that we have had in history have had autism, a spectrum disorder. So what can we do? Maybe as we wrap up, how can our audience reach you? You are such a dynamite, you know, you carry so much, and definitely. reach you, and any other thing that you will want the audience to know about this topic as a whole.
So thank you very much. As a mother to a young adult, I'm very passionate because sometimes I always think if I had gone back in time, to when my son was 3 today, probably I would really have done so much. But I have zero regrets because in terms of providing information to the to caregivers currently, all the information acquired over time, is very resourceful. And definitely I've also seen my son also transforming along the journey. So definitely as caregivers, we need to up our game in terms of getting the requisite information. And how can we get us? How can you get us? At different Retaliated Society of Kenya, our office is at Blessed House, Thika Road, first floor, just opposite Garden City Mall. You can also reach us through our email. You can do an email to us at differentretaliatedsociety@gmail.com. We also have our website, the Different Retaliated Societies website, that you can find us on Twitter, DTSK21. We are on Facebook. You can reach me personally. Would you want me to give my contact?
Oh, that's okay.
My contact is 0722 635598. You can also reach out to me personally. Thank you.
Thank you. And here we discuss real conversations about neurodevelopmental disorders. And if you have any story that you want us to speak about, or you want us to feature as far as neurodevelopmental disorders are concerned, please come up and we'll be able to have these conversations with you. And as we do that, we advocate for better policies, inclusivity, acceptance, hope and love in the society. And so let us continue knowing that having a neurodevelopmental disorder is not the end of the road. Keep speaking life, keep speaking positivity, keep speaking hope in the life of individuals and persons with neurodevelopmental disorders. If you have a space, if you are able to employ, if you are able to accommodate, if you are in the education sector, know that we all belong. Societies flourish when every member of the society is contributing positively to the flourishing of that society. And let's create a more inclusive world for those living with neurodevelopmental disorders in Africa. And thank you for listening to the Boom Trust podcast, Beauty Out of Mire. We all belong to something beautiful. Keep tuned for more stories of resilience and hope.